Hey, what's going on everyone? We have the meta snapshot for patch 13.19 and we are delayed by 1 day. Normally I post these every single Friday, but there was a B patch on late Thursday which kind of affected everything. So we wanted to make sure that you had a good meta snapshot that was actually relevant to the patch being played. That's why we were delayed a day. Maybe I write like a little note in my Discord next time. Link is in the description below, but let's get right into the comps so we don't waste any more time. In the S tier right now, Vanquishers have taken over the meta. They got buffed like a ton of times as we saw in the patch preview. And then Ashe Reroll gonna be another Vanquisher comp. Both of those are incredibly powerful, by far the two best comps right now. After that, we have Rogue Reroll, still very solid. Cho Bitem, it got nerfed a little bit, but it didn't really affect the main power of the comp. And then Azir Flex is gonna round out the S tier. I'd say you could probably spam the first two comps endlessly, play the next two if you get good starts with them, and then if you want to just play one comp forever, Azir Flex probably going to serve you pretty well on this patch. In the A tier, we have Demacia, Sorcerers, Shurima, Noxus Reroll, Bastion, Silco, Aphelios, Gunner Reroll, Challengers, Regular Gunners, Quinn Reroll, and then in the B tier, Karma, Naafiri, and then Bilgewater. Maybe Bilgewater gets bumped up to B, but right now it's just in the C tier. You don't really want to play it, even if it's like mediocre. There's just too many other things to go for. And all the Vanquishers are stealing your Nylas anyways. So maybe if Vanquishers were not so powerful, Bilgewater might be in the B tier. But it's kind of hard to get your Nylas now because all of them are being taken by the Vanq players. So onto the Legend tier list. Everyone's playing Poro now. You watch any top player, it's just Poro. Like 8 Poros per game. Maybe not 8, but there's 7 Poros and one person's trying something new. So for now, we're going to leave it at Poro, and then here are some secondary options if you really want it. Ornn got nerfed a lot, but I checked the stats for Portable Forge. So we go here and type in Portable Forge. The one taken on stage 2 is actually a 4.32, but there's one very important thing about the data in that Portable Forge, the augment, is not actually the people who took Ornn. All the people who took Ornn are the people who pick it through gold legend augment, but this includes all gold legend augments. It's just like a weird thing in Riot's API right now. The first augment you pick for your legend, gold, silver, or prismatic, it shows up as like a generic thing. So that's one thing to note. So Portable Forge on its own in stage 2, still good. And that's because Portable Forge itself is still good. However, the other Ornn augments are pretty bad. If we look at Small Forge, it's a 4.84. If we look at Medium Forge, it's a 4.99, Large Forge, 4.89. And then if we look at all the job ones, which is the ones for Ornn in stage 4, they're all below 4.5, except for Jobs Done, which was only taken in like very few games. So Portable Forge itself is good, but everything else in Ornn is just not a good package. So you probably re-roll those unless you're super desperate. But let's get right into the comps right now. So Vanquishers, finally, they're gonna be meta. We've been waiting for it. So I don't know what the plan is for TFT, but it seems like they always give each forecast their one patch to shine, and I think right now it's the Vanquishers' turn because they've been left in the dust in the early parts of the patch, except for Nyla, but Xayah's kind of been left in the dust, and now they're finally here to play. So it's just like a standard Ionia comp. So you put all the attack damage items on Xayah, you put like RFC on Nyla, tank items on Shen, late game you have Ahri to like throw some pretty big bombs, and then you play 6 Ionia, 4 Vanquisher. Very simple comp, don't really have to do that much. If you get extra units or if you get like a +1 Ionia, add in like a Heimerdinger, he'll make your day a lot better. You could also do stuff like Aatrox or like any other legendary. The only item that's really required is Rapid Fire Cannon, still really good on Nyla, but on Xayah, like pretty much any combo will do. And then in the early game, you use Jhin and Ashe as your item holder. That's another good thing about this comp. Ashe is really broken right now, so using her as an item holder means you have like one of the strongest units in the early game, and it could kind of coast you from late stage 4, even until early stage 5 before you get Xayah 2 and swap out your team. It's like Ashe is really that strong, but this comp is like slightly tricky to play. So the reason why it's slightly tricky to play is because it has a lot of 4-cost units. Shen, Nyla, and Xayah, those are pretty much the only units that matter in your comp. All the other people, Set, Darius, Jhin, Karma, like Ahri matters, but only if she's like has items or is 2-star. The only ones that actually matter are these 3 over here. So that's why stuff like Long Distance Pals is really good because it buffs up 2 units, 2 of your 3 units that you only care about. So stuff like that's really strong with this. But essentially what this means is that your leveling pattern has to be like a little greedier, hopefully. So if you're on like one of those big econ portals, this comp gets a little stronger because it's a little safer to get to level 8. Not safer, but you could get there a little bit faster. And then you have more gold to roll down for your carries. Or you just have like a ton of gold on level 7. You roll down like 80 gold on level 7 or something like that, you'll probably hit like 2 out of the 3 to 2-star, if not all 3 of them. But you could also just fast stay to do it too. It really depends on how your game's going. Or you go level 7, roll down maybe like 30 gold, hopefully you hit one of them 2-star, and then wait until stage 5, level up to 8, roll down to 0, hit everything 2-star after that. But if you do want to read the whole like write-ups, because some of these are much longer than the one we just saw, head on over to the website bunnymuffins.lol/meta, updated every Friday except in special circumstances like the one just happening this week. But let's move on into the comp of the week, which is Ashe Reroll. So Ashe Reroll, you want to go for set 3 and Ashe 3, and then if you get Ionia Spat on Ashe, it is just ridiculously strong. If we look at Ashe here, her average placement is a 4.13, but with Ionia emblem, it bumps up all the way to 3.76 with decently high play rate. So the data is actually reliable there. But absolutely ridiculous stuff. It matches up really well because Set's an incredible tank and also a 2-cost unit. So you pretty much play the same build as a Xayah build, except instead of Nyla, you play Ashe. That's literally all you have to do. And the great thing about Ashe Reroll is that the Ionia Spatula, you don't need to get it off an augment. I mean, obviously it helps if you do, but you could also craft this one from a spatula, which makes it much easier to build and therefore more reliable. But comp's really strong. You just need like a Last Whisper. Ionia Spat is optional. You could also do stuff like going for 6 Vanquisher if you get like a Vanquisher Spat. So you could add in Nyla, put the Vanquisher Spat on someone, and then you're going to be doing pretty fine there too. But this is going to be a 2-cost reroll comp, so you want to just roll at level 6 and do that until you hit both Ashe 3 and Set 3. I played 2-cost reroll recently, but that was in a game with Warwick, so it was a little bit different, but essentially, literally all you have to do is just stay level 6, roll down until you hit Ashe 3, like roll to 50 every single turn. Next turn, do the same thing again until you find a good time to all in. Maybe if you have like 7 or 8 Ashes, then you just roll all the way down until you hit, and the game's really easy after that because you just have your carry 3-star. But yeah, pretty simple comp to play. Most reroll comps are. And speaking of rerolls, we have another reroll comp, which is the Rogue reroll. But this one's actually a little different than the ones we've been seeing in the past. So the ones in the past relied more on like Echo and Katarina and Kiana, but this one is Graves and Kiana. So Graves definitely has some time to shine right now. A ton of different items work on Graves, and honestly, with Rogue reroll, it's really flexible. It says 2-cost reroll down here, but you could do 1-cost reroll, 2-cost, or 3-cost. It just depends on which champions that you're kind of getting. But 4 Rogue is really, really powerful. We could be a nerd and check the data and like, oh, 4 Rogue, 4.1, 2 Rogue, 4.58, and it has a higher play rate. So it's like, yeah, obviously Rogues are good right now. Not everything's a data check, but it just goes to show the power's mainly in the trait, not necessarily the individual carry that you choose. So it's like, you go for Rogues, and then you're like, which one am I hitting a lot of? If you're getting a lot of Graves in the early game, go for Graves. If you're hitting a lot of Kianas, obviously go for Kiana. Well, you pretty much go for Kiana in all Rogue rerolls. But let's say you don't hit many Graves, you go for Kiana, then you like level up a little bit. If you get a ton of Echoes or Katarinas, go for one or the other, or both if you happen to hit a lot of them and have a lot of gold, and kind of play around them like that. Promise that's like the last data check we'll do. Because again, really, not everything is about data. But we talk about how to play the Graves reroll version down here. You see if you could hit Graves first, and then you do like a 1-cost reroll at first, and then later on, you go for Kiana. However, even though you are playing Graves reroll, you don't do the typical 1-cost reroll pattern. So instead what you do is in 1-cost reroll, you normally roll at level 4 a lot on stage 3-1, but you don't do that anymore. You could go level 5 and then roll at level 5 because then you could hit both Graves and Kiana at the same time. Generally, the times where you do want to roll on level 4 is when you're going for a lot of different 1-cost units. For example, in the next comp, Cho Bitem, you could go for Renekton, Cho'Gath, Cassiopeia, or Malzahar 3-star. So you have like 4 different things that you could kind of roll for. But in this version, where we're playing Rogue reroll, we only have one 1-cost that we care about. So rolling at level 5 is acceptable because again, we're going for other units. Whenever you're rolling, you always want to try to be rolling for more than one thing. A rookie mistake that I see a lot of times is when people just literally roll for one unit. And it's just like a suboptimal use of gold unless like you're about to die. But since mainly a lot of these econ decisions come in the early game, you're probably not gonna die before stage 4, you know? Like obviously, like I've seen it happen before. I think the earliest, I think some people never made it to Wolf Camp one time. I think it is possible, but like it's very rare. I think it's like on Piltovers, like some people are left with like 1 health or something like that around that point. And like, yeah, sometimes you die by an extra unit and you just get knocked out of the game. But yeah, overall, like pretty decent comp, new rolling pattern for this specific build, but like it doesn't really apply to anything else, but it's useful to know in case we ever run into comps like this in the future where we have a very critical 2 cost in the comp and no other 1 cost in the build. All right, let's move on into the next one, which is the Cho'Gath comp. So Cho'Gath comp is very dominant from last patch and still dominant here because they only did like a small nerf to it. I actually respect them for doing a small nerf. I like that they did not try to overly kill the comp, so let's give them like a small round of applause here. However, it's only a small round of applause because the comp is still very oppressive, so it's very difficult to kind of hit the exact right spots. It's kind of like Goldilocks, right? You can't nerf it too little, but you can't nerf it too much. You have to get it just right. But oh my, what big teeth Cho'Gath has, because he's going to bite everyone throughout the whole fight still. So yeah, like same items as before. Declaw, Bramble, Redemption. Redemption can be replaced for Anima Visage. Absolutely insane comp. And eventually if you get to 6 Bruisers, because in the early game you're generally playing 4 Bruiser. 6 Bruiser makes you like automatically like top 3 essentially. Only go for this comp if you actually have a lot of Cho'Gaths in the beginning, because a lot of times, especially last patch, people just went for it just because it was popular. And it's probably not the best thing to do. You should only go for it if you have a good spot for it. But yeah, we're going to be doing the typical 1 cost reroll leveling pattern, which is rolling to 30 gold at 3-1 at level 4 for as many copies of Cho'Gath, Renekton, and Cassiopeia or Malzahar. You kind of have to commit to one of the 2. Either or works, it just depends who you're hitting that game. Lean more towards Cassiopeia, but Malzahar is like a very formidable second choice. It's like pretty much the same. But after you do this mini roll down, level back up to level 5, and then slow roll down to 50 gold every single time, and then all in, probably around stage 4-1. Items for everyone else, Renekton can kind of hold like the utility tank items, but it doesn't really matter, just throw anything on him. And then Cassiopeia, blue buff, plus like random damage items. Same build for Malzahar and Silco. Silco is a good backup in case you don't get Malzahar or Cassiopeia 3-star. So there are some games where you get Cho'Gath 3-star really, really quickly. And then let's say you only have 3 Renektons, 3 Cassiopeias. And obviously you need 9 of them to kind of get them to 3-star, right? In those cases, you could just skip going for Cassio 3-star and just power level up, get Silco instead, and use Silco as your late game carry. Very, very viable build there. And they both use a blue buff, so you don't like quote unquote waste the blue buff. But let's move on into the next build, which is Azir Flex. This comp's a little difficult. We did like a coaching video recently on Azir Flex, so definitely check that out if you have not already. I'll leave a card up here to kind of check out that game. And it's a very useful learning opportunity game because we did kind of get a little unlucky that game, but then we turned it around and made the best of a bad situation. Maybe not the absolute best, but it was good enough. But essentially what you want to do in this comp is play Azir and then find a secondary carry. Preferably Silco, but it could be someone else such as like Nyla or even like a legendary unit if you get to a lot of health in the late game. Nasus is going to be the main tank. 4 Juggernauts are like the preferred frontline, but sometimes you don't get it, in which case you could use like Jarvan as a tank or just put the tank items on Nasus anyways, run 2 Juggernauts and run like legendary tanks instead. The name of the comp is Azir Flex after all. That's why I recommend that some people who play this comp only play this comp, because then you learn all the ins and outs and all the different variations of this build, because it's honestly going to be too many to name in this video. After you add in getting random spatulas or emblems, this makes this comp even more difficult to play because you have to think of random situations where you go for a vertical trait or stay in this kind of like horizontal comp that we see here where we dip into a lot of different synergies. Then you have to also experiment with getting random secondary carries and see how to itemize around them, because that's going to be very important too, because Azir can't do everything on his own. He needs a secondary carry to kind of slow the fight down in order for Azir to ramp up all the way through the later parts of the fight. But mainly, like, the core is going to be 4 Juggernauts plus Azir, but again, like, worst case scenario, you could always use other stuff. Adding in random strategists is pretty good just because they give AP and shielding. It's like never a bad thing. It's like a mediocre trait that you can kind of add in for this comp as much as you like. But generally, if you get AD items, go for Nyla. If you get AP, go for Silco. But honestly, whoever you 2-star, that's another marker as well, because you're just building leftover items on them. What I mean by that is, let's say you're going for Silco. Obviously, you want blue buff on Silco, but in the early game, you're prioritizing Azir items. So if you get a tier early and you have a bow, you're probably just going to build a static Shiv early on. That means you won't have time to build items for Silco. Or maybe you get a Jarvan early and then you have like a cloth armor. Then you go for tier plus armor and then build the Protector's Vow on Jarvan. Essentially what I'm trying to say is that on carousels, you're mainly building Azir items such as like Rage Blade, Nashor's Tooth, things like that. So you won't ever really have perfect items for Silco. So you just put the leftover items on him and really just hope for the best. Don't really try to save items for the secondary carry because that's what they are. They are secondary. It's unfortunate, but that's the way life works. But yeah, overall this build, I recommend like playing it a few times before you like make too many judgments about it because it definitely is pretty solid as long as you kind of are able to navigate different situations. Let's move on into the next build. This is going to be like Quinn Reroll / Demacia. So 7 Demacia, overall pretty decent. Fiora still good. Fiora did get nerfed a little bit, so all her challenger builds, some of her Demacia builds are a little bit weaker, but overall still pretty nice. Quinn Reroll is a good like backup out because she still does a bunch of damage on her own, and combined with like duo carry with Fiora, it works out really nicely because the way Demacia works is you get a bunch of free items, so you don't need like 6 items for both Fiora, Quinn, and your tank. You could just do like 2 and 2, and then you're good to go. If you ever do get a Demacia crest, go for Mordekaiser, and if you ever want to do ginormous like guaranteed wins, 9 Demacia is probably the best 9 trait in the game right now. So definitely go for that if you are ever in a situation where you can. But to play this comp, you just do standard leveling pattern, and then if you hit a lot of Quins, go for Quinn 3. If not, level up to play some other stuff, go for some legendaries, and then just focus on your Fiora. But that's pretty much it for this build. Let's move on into the next one. Pretty simple to play other than like, of course, daily reminder or weekly reminder. Only put 2 items on your Demacia units because they need to get the Radiant item. Next comp up we have is Sorcerers. So Sorcerers is just going to be Silco carry. Sorcerers is kind of funny because I remember last set they're like pretty much like very well balanced throughout the entire set, and I think it's looking like that so far in this set as well. It's like kind of like highish A tier, like always playable, always solid. You only play it if you get good spots for it. If you get a +1, that's going to be the times where you go for it, or if you get like one of the really good sorcerer augments such as like Infusion or something like that. They have like an early game carry in Malzahar, mid game carry with Vel'Koz, late game with Silco, and super late game with Ahri. Everything just flows pretty well. The only thing they're kind of missing is their tanks are a little bit weaker, but Taric and Swain, they're like decent. They're nothing like horrible, but they're just not like that great because they're just a 2 and 3 cost, and you don't really slow roll for them to 3-star. But you do have other options. So for example, you could go for Vel'Koz 3 to complement your Silco, or go for the Ahri 2-star. Both versions are good depending on what you're hitting that game. Obviously, if you don't have a lot of Vel'Kozes, don't do it. But if you do, then it's something to kind of look out for. I generally only play this comp if I get a blue buff or some sort of mana regeneration on Silco. If not, I wouldn't really touch this, or unless I'm just forcing Sorcerers from the beginning. Let's say I start the game with Malzahar 2, I have 1 copy of Swain, and like maybe like let's say I start the game off with like a 2-star Malzahar, 2-star Orianna, which does happen quite a bit, and like a 1-star Swain. It is definitely like a game where you could kind of look towards going for Sorcs as long as your items are just like any bit buildable. Obviously, you'd prefer to put something on Malzahar, but not guaranteed to happen every game. But typically, whenever I do go Sorcerers, I always just force them from the start. I'm not really kind of building for them early on. Next build up we have is Shurima. So Shurima is pretty fun, right? Last set it was my favorite comp. This set, I don't know what my favorite comp is so far. Honestly, it's a little cringe. It might be the Cho'Gath build just because it's so fun, but it's kind of like a double-edged sword. If it is good, generally, I won't be playing it because too many people are going to be going for it and it's too contested. And then when it's bad, obviously, I don't want to play a bad comp, right? So maybe I play a lot of Cho'Gath now because it did get nerfed a bit and it's still very good. So maybe now is my time to just like whip out a lot of Cho'Gath games. But the Shurima build is just like a classic vertical Shurima game. Go for 6 Shurima, add in some random synergies. If you don't have those random synergies, you could always throw in more strategists until you get them. And then make Nasus your main tank, Jarvan secondary tank, or Cassante, and then just all the items on Azir. If you do get a Shurima spat, you could get a secondary carry because Azir loves having a secondary carry. Common units to put the Shurima emblem on is just like Jarvan, Aatrox, things like that. Just to have like other units. I've seen Bel'Veth work too, but Bel'Veth's always like a little weird to kind of play around. But overall, build Rageblade on Azir, play for 4 cost. This is a pretty expensive comp because like you have 3 4-cost units. Unlike some of the other builds, the other units do matter. Like Cassante 2 is pretty important. Talia's good for CC. Renekton's really good for early game. But you generally just focus on like Azir, Nasus, and Jarvan. But next comp up we have is Noxus Reroll. Noxus Reroll, it's mainly just Samira and stuff. You're going to be wanting the blue buff, you're going to be wanting the RFC on Mordekaiser, and then Swain's going to be your main tank. So reroll first for Samira and Cassiopeia. Let's look at the leveling pattern down here. You do the roll down to 30 gold at 3-1 because again, you're going for 2 different 1-cost units, so the gold there is well spent. So even though we're looking for Swain, focusing on the 1-cost is super important because that's going to be your main carries. After that, you do the same slow roll as we do with other 1-cost rerolls, and then once you hit Samira 3 and Cassiopeia 3, you have a decision point. You have to count how many Swains you have. If you only have like a 2-star Swain and that's it, probably don't go for a reroll Swain. But if you have like 5 copies, 6 copies, definitely go for Swain 3 and use that as your main tank. If you can't get that, unfortunately, you probably have to level up and just like recognize that you're probably not gonna super win this game unless you really hit an early Scion. After that, secondary or like tertiary damage dealer is going to be Mordekaiser, absolute monster by the way, because when combined with all this other stuff you have in the back dealing so much damage, Mordekaiser just like, he has a much easier time because he doesn't have to take so much time auto-attacking, killing all the units. He only has to kill like half the units if your Samira is really jacked up. If you do get a Noxus spat, Azir is incredibly good in this because you both get Strategist and Shurima from Cassiopeia, so Azir just complements his team really well. Sometimes you could go for Katarina as a secondary carry too, but generally I prefer doing stuff like the Mordekaiser with the Samira. Cassiopeia, not too important because she's a little item reliant, like the blue buff is incredibly good on her, and you already want a blue buff on Samira, so it's a little weird getting like 4 tiers. But obviously, again, we're not so lucky every single game. Some games you just can't go for like everything 3-star, and you just have to make sure you recognize those situations. Next build up we have is Bastion Aphelios. With Silco, this is going to be the main stall comp of the set. You just play the Bastions to burn a lot of time, tank a lot of stuff. And then ideally, Aphelios with the Rage Blade stacks up. Silco with the blue buff Morello kind of slowly whittles everyone down. And then over time, you just kill everyone. Unfortunately, Nico did get a buff, but Nico reroll isn't really that big of a thing. She works in some weird builds, but this is not one of them. Maybe if it gets super popular, we'll cover it in a future video. But as of right now, the 3-star version of Nico, not that great. I mean, if you get it for free, it's really good. But if you compare it to other 3-cost rerolls, it's just a little weird to kind of play around. If you get it, great. It also depends on what your Ixtal is. You generally play it in Ixtal comps, and then you just really buffer up and then go from there. But back to the Aphelios build. Like, AD items for Aphelios really good. Vladimir Legend's pretty good too. That's the one with Transfusion and Ascension, because Ascension is incredible in this comp, because you're literally a stall comp. And then after that, like, you just do standard leveling pattern, go for all your 4 costs, Shen, Silco, Aphelios. All the other people are just like trade bots. And yeah, nothing else really matters after that. Next build up we have is Gunner reroll with Jinx and Jayce. This comp got nerfed heavily, but it's still pretty solid. You just don't play it in that many situations, and there are a couple different versions of it. So there's a version you see here with like Piltover and stuff, with 4 Zon, 4 Gunner, but there's also another version with kind of like a Bruiser frontline. But honestly, your frontline doesn't really matter that much, as long as you get like Jinx and Jayce 3-star. You could be good to go. But some options that other people use is instead of running 4 Zon, they take out Warwick and Silco. And then they leave Echo in, they add in Heimerdinger, they add in Sejuani, and they add in Scion. And that's kind of how they play around the build. Pretty much the same thing though, not really that different, but I just want you guys to know that, just to give you some other options. But again, check out the meta snapshot if you want to read through all the information there if you're playing the build. Some people like to have it up on their second monitor or something, or they just alt tab in and out. But next build up we have is Challengers. So several Fiora nerfs, and Master Yi also got nerfed, gotta go fast, now no longer very good. So this comp definitely moved down from the S tier to the A tier. Still playable. It's not just something you want to just force out of the gate though. I think some of the other combat augments got nerfed too, and this comp was really good with combat augments. So that's another reason why this comp is a little down right now. This comp's really simple to play though. If the unit says Challenger on it, just buy it. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 Challengers, and then we add in Quinn and Jarvan for Demacia for Fiora, and then Heimerdinger Aatrox just because they're big units in the later parts of the game. So obviously, if you don't have Aatrox and Heimerdinger, play Samira and Aurelia to get to 6 Challenger. But mainly, you're just going to focus items on Fiora and Kai'Sa, and then random tank items on Jarvan. Standard leveling pattern again with this build, and this is also one of those builds that really only cares about 3 units, the units that we just called out, and therefore stuff like long distance PAL is really good because it buffs up 2 units when you only care about 3 of them. But obviously, you got to fix your positioning in order to take advantage of it. So for example, you can move Naafiri there and Fiora here, and then both Kai'Sa and Fiora will get the buff that way. Next build up we have is Gunners. So Gunners definitely took a big hit recently. Essentially, Aphelios is just in an okay spot. Nothing broken, nothing horrible. It's just like one of the weaker forecasts, I would say. Doesn't mean it's bad, because most forecasts are really good. Just out of all the carries, he does seem to fall a little bit behind compared to, let's say, Silco, Nyla, Xayah, things like that. I think those are most of the backline carries. But obviously, since you're playing Piltover, the comp's really only good with early Piltover. You want to get as big of a cash out as possible. So wait till your very, very last life. So I'd say if you're like 12 health or below, that's when you want to try to cash out. At 13, it's kind of iffy because it depends what stage it is. But sometimes you die, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you could squeeze out that last life for one extra cash out, and then you roll down to 0, get as strong as board as you can as quickly as possible, win that next round, cash out, and ideally you just win the game after that. It's very hard to lose, at least. But you really just focus on Aphelios, Sejuani as the two main units you care about. And then if you get a bunch of extra items, you could play like random stuff. If you get like a bunch of Force of Natures, you could put it on random 2-star legendaries that you'll end up getting after the cash out. It's just a really fun comp to play, but you definitely eat some 8ths here and there. I'd say overall you get like first maybe like, I don't know, let's say like 40% of the time. You get second maybe like 20% of the time, and then you get 8th the rest of the time. It's probably something like that. I'm obviously pulling those numbers out of my tuckus, but essentially you go first, second if you're unlucky, and then last if you're really unlucky, or if you can't cash out. Sometimes you can't cash out and then you get punished really hard. But really fun comp to play. You just have to play around with your health levels a ton. Next up, we have the B tier, so we're finally onto like the stuff that I would kind of avoid right now. Karma Reroll, definitely a lot weaker than most other comps. Probably still a solid go-to if you get like a ton of karmas early on, but apart from that, definitely wouldn't touch this comp that much. After that, we have Naafiri Reroll. Needs some buffs, seen some better days. The stats on 3-star Naafiri is around like 4.2, 4.3, which generally for 2-cost 3 stars isn't that great. For example, I think Ashe at 3-star is like a 3.5 right now. So you probably want like 2-cost 3 stars to be maybe at like 3.9 or something like that, 4.0 in order for them to be kind of like good to go for most of the time. But yeah, this one's a little low for my taste, so I would kind of avoid it. And then after that, Bilgewater, yeah, it's still pretty bad. They tried giving it compensation buffs for all the nerfs it gave before, but still not that great, especially since people are griefing your Nylas. And because of that, it's kind of hard to fill out your entire team. But going back up to the top, we have, again, Vanquisher Ashe. It's just going to be the story of this week. And hopefully some counters get developed, because sometimes people come up with new comps to kind of work around what's meta. But we still have the tried and true reroll comps if you don't want to like play Vanquishers or Azir Flex. Cho Bitem, Rogue Reroll, and Ashe Reroll, all very solid options at 1 cost and 2 cost. And then we have the Rogue Reroll, which is kind of like different than other rerolls we've been playing in the past. After that, a lot of the comps that worked last patch are still pretty okay right now. But I generally play the first 5 comps. So there are only like 8 players in a TFT game, and we have like 5 comps in the S tier right now. So it's like, do you really want to play the A tier that much? Probably not. So what probably is important though is if you want to know like which comps to go for a little more, which comps are S+, which comps are S, which comps are S-, head on over to the Patreon or the OnlyFans in order to find out. And if not, that's okay too. It's not going to make that much of a big difference if you know how to play the game, because you generally, no matter what, you should only be playing what you get from your rolls and what's on your board. So obviously, if you get great Bastion Aphelios games, go for Bastion Aphelios. If you get great Karma Reroll games, definitely go for Karma Reroll. But most games, you're probably going to be playing Vanquishers this patch. And yeah, that's going to be pretty much it from me this week. We will be updating again next Friday, and I promise it'll actually be on Friday this time, unless they come up with another surprise B patch. I highly doubt it, but they might. You never know what to expect. But hopefully you all enjoyed this video. Sorry that we posted on Saturday again. I'll probably try to write a note somewhere, and then we will see you after that. But that's gonna be it for me today. Hope to see you all next time. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to share and subscribe, and of course smash that like button. Each like is an LP I gain before the next video.